Howdy everyone. So it's been a long couple of months in my neck of the woods, and because of that, I thought I was overdue to make something lighter than usual. You know, a video that doesn't devolve into piles of research about something controversial, or lead to me having to binge an entire filmmaker's filmography in like a week or two. I suppose I just want an opportunity to hang out and gush about a movie for a bit. One like Garden State, Zach Braff's 2004 directorial debut. A movie that's still well known among fans of indie flicks, but has become known as a, to be kind, piece of pretentious fluff over the years. However, as you can tell from the length of this upload, it turned out that I had a bit more to say about Garden State. You see, revisiting it got me to start thinking about its reputation and how it's a bit unfair. For while Garden State is far from perfect, it does have a few things going for it that are hard not to admire in 2025. Things that got me curious about pretentiousness in art in general and how it might just get a bad rap. To best discuss Garden State, I think it's worth taking a moment to provide some context into its production and the person that made it. This is because the film was heavily inspired by its creator's personal life, and often feels more like a therapeutic exercise for the guy than a product with any financial interests. Garden State was written by its director and star Zach Braff while he was waiting tables in LA and trying to make it as an actor. It was 2001, and Braff was still just a face in an endless sea of talent, as the show he would become known for, Scrubs, hadn't aired yet. The film gets its signature tone from being a reflection of Braff's own OCD and depression. In a 2023 interview with The Independent, he had this to say on the subject. "I had OCD as a child. I knew I was battling something. That's what writing Garden State was about. I wasn't as extreme as Andy, but I was certainly battling my own demons. As I was writing it, I was hoping I could survive what became known as the quarter-life crisis and depression, and fantasizing that the perfect woman would come along and rescue me." Likewise, he would state that this film and its spiritual sequel, Wish I Was Here, were something like a memoir when he appeared in a 2015 episode of Off Camera with Sam Jones.
Both films are very personal to me. They are versions of memoirs. They are versions of my life.
Garden State follows Braff's character Andrew Largeman on a trip to his hometown in New Jersey following the death of his mother. Back for the first time since he was a kid, he interacts with his estranged father and catches up with his childhood friends. Along the way, he stops taking the cocktail of drugs he's been on for over a decade and begins processing his feelings with the help of a young adult with epilepsy named Sam. A new adult coming-of-age plot ensues, with Andrew and Sam meeting a slew of strange characters as they try to get to know each other. Eventually, Andrew confronts his father and acknowledges the role he played in his mother becoming a paraplegic. The end. Oh yeah, and he smooches Sam and decides to pursue a relationship with her. Cue frou-frou. Garden State almost feels like something you had to be there for. It's a film that's rooted in the year it got made and expresses a genuine desire to discuss mental health at a time before it became as normalized as it is now, whilst counterbalanced against a culture that wasn't quite ready to do that yet. It's a snapshot of a transitional period in film, something from just after the indie boom of the 90s, but a bit before the explosion of mumblecore movies and streamable media occurred. Its premise fits in neatly among these two periods, coming across as the halfway point between something like Clerks and Frances Ha. Garden State's placement in the history of independent film is much like its lead character Andrew Largeman in how it encapsulates one of independent film's many adolescent periods. It's a bit lost, confused, and frustrated with itself. There's an obvious desire for the film to grow past its hang-ups and where it is at this particular moment of history, but it's not entirely equipped to do it either, encapsulating a feeling of transition. Though its premise may not sound like much on paper, a lot of people ended up relating to Garden State and what it had to offer. A simple Google search of the movie will turn up an endless parade of comments from folks who see themselves in it. The soundtrack is straight up iconic, having beaten out Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2 soundtrack at the 2005 Grammys, and is still both fondly remembered and available new on vinyl. Heck, several artists from this soundtrack are even reuniting to perform it live for charity around the time I'm uploading this video.
This is the Shins. I'll be honest and say I probably don't know any other Shins song but this one because of, Zach Braff.
Yep.
Garden State, yeah.
And quality-wise, the movie's fine. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend it's an underrated masterpiece or anything, but it's pretty good at points, and yeah, admittedly a bit bad at others.
Blah, 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 blah.
The screenplay won't win any awards, but it's Braff's first writing credit, and it isn't the worst thing ever penned either. Heck, it doesn't even have any of its cast members' worst dialogue from the era.
We live in a real world. Come back to it.
For a debut film from a guy who had only directed a short up to that point and would start directing episodes of Scrubs later that year, it's a slightly above average feature debut. Yet despite this, people have grown to hate it over the years. You don't have to look that hard to find publications, content creators, or moviegoers that absolutely detest it.
It almost seemed like a parody of independent films, like awful movies like Garden State and stuff like that.
They see it as little more than a cringy movie where Zach Braff, a man best known for playing a doctor on TV, whines about depression and downplays the value of medication. To them, the movie has, as Jesse David Fox put it in a 2014 article defending the film, become a symbol for its blend of quirky, twee, morose, earnest, precious hipsterness, and resent it for it. Now, to be fair, I actually agree with a number of the points that have been made about the film over the years. But I also feel that its problems have since led to people dismissing the movie as simply being pretentious when there's a bit more under the hood than that, and when that's kind of the point. So today, I thought it'd be fun to sit down and revisit this time capsule from 2004. I'm gonna talk about the things I love about Garden State, some of the reasons why folks abhor it, and why I think it's fine for movies like it to exist. Well, right after this super quick plug. If you're enjoying the video so far and you want to help the channel grow, please consider becoming a patron or channel member. A few shillings a month go a long way in helping me make these videos. And if you want to support the channel but don't have a few bucks to spare, that's totally cool too. You can still lend a hand by answering the following question of the day in the comments. What's your favorite bad movie? A film that you know isn't perfect and certainly has its problems, but still means a lot to you anyway. One of mine is 1987's adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel Less Than Zero, mostly because I adore the book, and while the movie lacks a lot of what made it good, I still enjoy its cinematography and soundtrack. And with that out of the way, on with the video. I think that Roger Ebert's review of the movie does a good job of describing its appeal. In its closing paragraph, he said, "This is not a perfect movie. It meanders and ambles and makes puzzling detours, but it's smart and unconventional, with a good eye for the perfect detail, such as when Andrew arrives at work in Los Angeles and notices that the spigot from a gas pump, ripped from its hose when he drove away from a gas station, is still stuck in his gas tank. Something like that tells you a lot about a person's state of mind." And yeah, that's totally it. The film's appeal is in how internalized everything is, both in terms of its protagonist's mindset and how it interfaces with Braff and his career. Knowing that he was an actor first and foremost at the time explains that attention to detail that Ebert mentioned. The film wasn't written or directed by a quote-unquote proper writer or director, though he did get his degree in film studies at Northwestern. It was made by an actor that wanted to explore his own feelings and emotions, hence all of the hyper-specific choices and quirks in the material. It's talent writing their dream part and getting to call the shots on how it gets made. There's a strong emphasis on characterization and on giving the actors plenty to do because of this. Aside from the strong visuals and music choices, which I'll get to soon, Garden State's greatest strength isn't in its writing or message. It's that hyper-specificity. Everything is singular. There's an idiosyncratic tinge to every detail. They tell us something about our protagonist. Take that shot of Andrew in that tacky shirt, for instance. It doesn't just tell us that green totally suits him. It represents how he feels like decor that fades into his surroundings. It's also a connection to his late mother, who had just redecorated the bathroom using that wallpaper a month before she died. He appears to us as a head with his torso camouflaged against the wall, and evokes the disconnect between his headspace and his physical body. It's also just a great excuse to cut to this gag from Scrubs because it's visually similar and, well, because I gotta cut to something right now in order to keep things punchy.
Body, come! Damn it!
This extends past the performances and tone of the film too. One of my favorite details is how most, if not all, of Garden State takes place on overcast or rainy days. The overall lack of sunlight in the movie gives it a mugginess. It makes things come across as foggy or detached, working as a complement to Largeman's headspace. I especially like this because, even in the clearest example of this not being the case, it still tells us a bit about how Andrew feels. There's actually some science behind the idea that rainy weather can contribute to feelings of lethargy and depression in some people, and speaking as a guy whose body aches like it just ran a marathon whenever it so much as drizzles, I think it adds an amazing bit of texture and mood to the movie. A texture and mood that's deepened when you recall that Andrew's mother drowned in a bathtub, tying the element of water to the film's inciting incident. Realizing that really blew the doors open on just how meaningful water is in this story. For instance, it's kind of interesting that Andrew can't swim.
Dude, maybe you should stay on the steps. I don't know CPR.
You look like a wet beaver.
It also starts pouring when Andrew, Mark, and Sam are at the quarry. The three of them find themselves drenched by an unexpected rainstorm during their quest to retrieve Mark's going away present for Andrew, and the sequence serves as a metaphor for the tears that he's been unable to shed following the death of his mother. Tears that, sure enough, finally get shed for real in a nearby scene. Similarly, if you look in the background of many other shots in the movie, you might pick up on the fact that it's raining in them too. While the film's commentary track makes it clear that this was never intentional and is more a byproduct of shooting on location on a tight schedule, I still find it thematically relevant. It almost suggests that Andrew's grief is following him wherever he goes, even if he isn't consciously aware of it.
Pouring rain
We're
right now.
like, this is miserable. Day 24. I think we should go home
Look, you
now.
can see the rain in the light there.
And this was the beginning of that same evening, and it's less rain, obviously.
Anyway, the water metaphor doesn't stop there either, as Andrew found himself on a boat while they were at the quarry. A boat that, yeah, may not float anymore, but is still a boat that its owner refers to as his own private ark. That's still gotta symbolize something, you know? Especially since the original name for the film was gonna be the ever so ponderful Large's Ark. The alligator costume that Sam once wore as an ice skater might represent something in the larger scope of the film too. I feel like it was included as a riff on the idea of crocodile tears, or insincere fake tears. It makes sense since Sam is initially presented as being a compulsive liar.
Okay, so sometimes I lie. I mean, I'm weird, man.
In the scene following that ice skating sequence, she comes clean about another one of her lies and tells Andrew that she has epilepsy. It gives off the impression that some of her lies may be tied to a misplaced sense of shame she carries toward that, and it also leads to her telling him that she still cries about her condition and looks forward to whenever that happens. This stands in direct and obvious contrast to Andrew.
I haven't cried since I was a little kid. I didn't cry at my mother's funeral.
Sure, it's a bit shallow and obvious to have rain and water symbolize sadness, but who cares? It makes sense for the movie to go with such an obvious metaphor. If you look at it from a broader perspective, Andrew has spent the entire movie struggling to express and feel common, everyday emotions. The man is numb to the world around him, unable to feel anything as base level as fear or dread when he dreams that he's basically in the plane crash from Lost. He's repressed. His emotions are stuck following him around as opposed to getting expressed. And when you consider that with how the storm finally shows water catching up to him, we get to see that change. That buildup and release is what the film is about. It's the reason why Braff went with the still from this scene as the basis for the film's original poster.
But I really thought it summed up the movie in a way. It's really about wanting to primal scream off a crane in the rain.
Lack of inventiveness aside, it works. Everything that happens after Andrew makes like a pina colada and gets caught in the rain is about him expressing himself. He gets swept up in the moment and makes out with Sam while Mark just kinda stands there. He screams into what had just been called an infinite abyss. He has the conversation he's been avoiding with his father. It's all reflective of the growth he experienced thanks to exploring his home state with his friends.
That's what I think about the whole thing, okay? And I'm not gonna take those drugs anymore, okay? They let me completely f***ing numb. I have felt so f***ing numb to everything I've experienced in my life, okay?
Another thing I appreciate about the film is that Andrew is an actor. It's a small detail that says a lot about who he is as a person. The character has been on medication since he was 9 years old, and it's because of the specific cocktail of drugs he was put on that he doesn't know who he is anymore. As far as his personality goes, Andrew is a bit of a blank slate for most of the movie. The truth is that Andrew has been acting for years, to the point where most people don't even realize that something might be off about him. Aside from his closest friends, everyone just kinda sees him as one of his roles.
Oh, what the f***, man? You're this huge movie star now? I heard you did you played a big football player or something? I didn't see it.
Fat, yo? F yeah, Serpico and sh**. Attica! Hey, weren't you on a TV show or something?
Yeah, it was just this show.
Not to mention, his being an actor also brought him to LA, a city that's usually synonymous with sunshine and good weather, yet gets presented as being overcast and sanitized here. There's even a strong push to blue in two of these shots too, emulating the classic day for night technique that was used to, well, portray day as night in older movies. In other words, artifice being lathered on top of reality as an obfuscation, something that's there to literally tint how we perceive the environment and convey how Andrew feels. I also think his being an actor informs the ending of the movie when, having finally had a minor breakthrough, he tries to do the right thing by putting his burgeoning relationship with Sam on hold so that he can continue to work on himself. It's the exact action someone in this situation should take, and reflects the maturity that he's been growing toward for the entire story. Yet it isn't what he truly wants to do. In a way, it's another instance of Largeman continuing to be an actor, which is why his eventual decision to turn around and come back for her anyway works for me more than it doesn't. It's a bit too sappy for my tastes, but it does show the character dropping that pretense and acting off of intuition and impulse. The ending isn't necessarily happy, and we don't see a full shift toward a warmer color palette or anything either. The final shot is deliberately balanced to contrast cold and warm tones, reflecting the growth he's experienced and the idea that he's hopefully on the right path now. A path that involves Sam and the warmth he experienced while he was with her family.
Come on, you're giving me a hug too.
Mom, come on.
I'll take a hug.
If you'll recall, I previously stated that Braff was more of an actor than he was a writer or director back in 2004. And all of these details are the exact sort of thing that might happen when you put one in charge of telling a story. He approaches the material as an actor would, thinking about motivations and how his character, who we should remember is inspired by and played by Braff himself, is gonna process his surroundings. Additionally, Garden State is Braff's first real directing gig, and it totally shows. Huge chunks of this movie are shot like a music video, and though the material features a number of artful nuances and quirks that we've already touched on, there's also a certain lack of restraint or subtlety to how they get wielded. Take for instance the way that the film played with speed ramping in order to portray Andrew taking ecstasy. It isn't particularly subtle. For me, a choice like that almost comes across as something that was made to give Largeman something to react to, or, when he doesn't, as is often the case, make a point about his inability to. You can totally see this in the film's use of music too. Garden State's soundtrack is similar to the film's use of water in how it's an exceedingly obvious way to portray grief. Music has long been known to amplify and influence our emotions, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that's seen a movie before to hear that filmmakers love to take advantage of that. To the point where some of them, like Hal Hartley, go as far as to compose and perform the music for their films themselves, while others, like Braff or George Lucas in American Graffiti, rely on popular pre-existing music. While Garden State is far from innovative for its use of music, the songs Braff picked are all undeniably effective. Every note has a purpose for being there. The emotions hinted at by the music and visuals might get beaten over our heads, both because of their actual musical composition and lyrics, but there's a reason for that, and they complement the visuals that they're presented with. In hindsight, it isn't that crazy that the soundtrack has continued to enjoy success 20 years later. It's a good collection of music that flows from song to song in a thematically cohesive way. Despite being a glorified mixtape, it feels like a proper album with the film's visuals serving as their music videos. Videos have this amazing ability to break the normal space and time constraints of a scene. Many of them work closer to montage, skipping around and giving us brief flashes of what's going on without stopping to let us catch our breath. They often prioritize a vibe over telling a clear story, and that makes it the perfect fit for depicting Andrew's mental state. After all, Andrew's a depressed actor who spaces out and drifts from moment to moment like a character in a music video.
I don't really feel like stressed or anxious at all.
Oh, so the lithium he's had you on. It's amazing you can even hear me right now.
His mental state informs the movie and gives it its aggressively 2000s music video vibe, down to it informing the color choices and giving things a palette that's becoming of a video from the era. This all reminds me of a video I once saw of the musician Todd Rundgren doing a lecture at the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music in 2010. He was talking about chords and how knowing when to use a major seventh can make a listener feel a specific emotion on command.
Here's the regular seventh. Regular C chord. Major seventh. Oh, I feel melancholy all of a sudden. I mean, this is just saying, okay, we start here. This is saying, feel this way.
That's basically what Braff is doing here, playing that extra note on a piano to make sure that we feel the emotions that Andrew can't. And because Andrew is so emotionally numbed over, there's an element of exaggeration and, no pun intended, largeness to what we're exposed to. Things are played big because Andrew can't feel his emotions and is trying to overcompensate for that. It's a great touch that loops back to the concept I've expressed in this chapter, and the one that was mentioned by Ebert in his assessment of the movie. The idea that Garden State is heavily informed by character and detail. Look, I think you get the point when it comes to all the things there are to love about Garden State. Yeah, there's plenty more we can bring up, like Peter Sarsgaard putting in some great work, and the fact that the film is often pretty funny. But I feel those are obvious enough to go unsaid. The point of this chapter was to establish the ways in which the film has more depth than its critics give it credit for. And I think the points I've discussed here have done a fine job of doing that. So how about this? Why don't we switch gears to briefly run through, validate, and explore the key ways that Garden State comes up short. Let's begin by addressing the elephant in the room, since it's one of the two major complaints that people have about this movie. Sam is a cliché character and the embodiment of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it was coined by film critic Nathan Rabin in his review of 2005's Elizabethtown. According to him, an MPDG exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures. AKA Sam and Garden State, Penny Lane and Almost Famous, The Thing That Summer Was a Commentary On in 500 Days of Summer, etc. The term has some flexibility when it comes to how we use it, but it can best be simplified as being a female character whose larger function in a story is to make a man into a better person. Your more typical MPDGs get portrayed as being a bit eccentric, or at least having a wild, carefree personality that stands in contrast to the film's protagonist. And when they do have some depth, or a backstory that explains their behavior, they still seldom get to be more than some abstract concept for a male protagonist. That last point's an important one, as in many cases, it's what separates an MPDG from a character that just so happens to be a bit alternative or different.
I'm not a concept, Joel. I'm just a f***ed up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind.
The label fits Sam so well that, in a perfect coincidence, a picture of her is the first thing you see on the Script Lab's article about the trope. Sam is the exact opposite of Andrew as far as her characterization goes. She's a bit better dressed and more put together than him since she's always wearing more colorful clothes, as well as shirts with a collar or buttons beneath her sweatshirts. While Andrew's face is framed by a typically messy pair of curtain bangs, she usually keeps her hair back or in a ponytail. While Andrew can't cry, Sam is all about having a good cry.
Why are you crying?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Even the bit I shared about Andrew being an actor gets contrasted by her to some degree. He's an actor by trade who, seemingly subconsciously, uses it to hide from the emotions he can't feel, whereas Sam isn't an actor but is a self-aware pathological liar. Yes, they both regularly lie insofar that they present themselves as something they aren't, but Sam knows that she's doing it. She's actively using it as a defense mechanism while Andrew isn't. Her entire character revolves around Andrew and what his arc seeks to fulfill. Details of her life may be motivated by and informed by her epilepsy, but they aren't lived in or given time to be explored. She's a quintessential Manic Pixie Dream Girl in how she isn't particularly well developed or interesting once separated from Andrew. Now, for what it's worth, I don't even think that we should try to challenge how well she fits that label. After all, Braff himself has since addressed her as being exactly that. If you'll recall a quote I read from his interview with The Independent, he was a depressed guy who was writing about his feelings and how he wished someone would swoop in and save him. And just a moment earlier in that interview, he shared what inspired the character in the first place when he said, "I was just copying Diane Keaton in Annie Hall and Ruth Gordon in Harold and Maude. Those were my two favorite movies growing up, and I was kinda taking those two female protagonists and melding them into Natalie Portman." He was even saying the same general thing back in 2004 too, like in his Bobby Wygant interview.
Was that kind of your dream girl that you put into that character?
I think so. I think there's a universal male fantasy of finding, all of a sudden one day you're going to come around a corner and there'll be this girl who'll stand out and be so eccentric and so different from every other person you've ever met. So what I wrote was the ultimate version of that.
So rather than try to contest and argue about her being a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, I'd rather just, agree with him. I mean, the guy said it for himself. She is one, and yeah, it's not a good look. That said, I do believe that it makes some sense when you consider Andrew as a character, what he represents, and the general culture of the early 2000s. We can infer that Andrew is somewhere in his mid to late 20s based off of Braff's age when he wrote and made this, as well as the fact that he was writing about his real quarter-life crisis. Because of this, we can view him as a reflection of many men in this age range. A demographic that, and this should come as no surprise to a lot of folks watching this, aren't always the best when it comes to emotional maturity. If you don't believe me, look no further than the state of independent and romantic cinema about men close to this age group. You've got Noah Baumbach's roster of guys in their early to mid-20s in 1995's Kicking and Screaming. A group of lads that includes a fully grown man that finds out the girl he went out for pizza with is only 16 and still makes out with her.
I'm gonna be 17 tomorrow, and I like that.
So now you can read 17 magazine and finally get all the references.
Ew!
Furthermore, we can look at Tom from 500 Days of Summer, a movie that's a deconstruction of romance as a young adult. We can also take a look at Jesse from 2012's Liberal Arts, a movie that has a lot in common with Garden State when you consider the fact that it was written, directed by, and stars the lead from another sitcom that ran for 9 seasons and featured that lead pining for a character played by Sarah Chalke at one point. Though Josh Radnor's Jesse is a decade older than the characters I've previously listed, he encapsulates the same general spirit as them. His story is one of a man that leads a dissatisfied life as an adult and longs for the simplicity of his college days. In the process, he strikes up a rapport with Elizabeth Olsen's 19-year-old character Zibby, a Manic Pixie Dream Girl that could hospitalize you if you took a shot every time she perpetuates a trope.
Have you ever thought about that?
About what?
How everything in life is basically improvised? We should hug.
Sorry, I don't want to hold you up for anything, but I made this for you. Burned it, whatever.
In each of these examples, we see aimless 20-somethings, if even only at heart, in need of guidance that maybe because of the way society places a premium on romantic relationships and our damn caveman brains, leads to them placing stock in women, and in the case of that one guy from Kicking and Screaming, a teenage girl. In the 2013 Atlantic article, The Real World Consequences of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl Cliché, author Hugo Schweizer explores the real-world implications of the trope. He discusses how some have used the Manic Pixie Dream Girl as a template for women on how to live their lives over the years, and how MPDGs have existed since long before the term was coined. The piece also suggests that Manic Pixie Dream Girls aren't a type of person so much as they're a type of interpretation, or lack thereof, of someone done by an observer. The final lines of the piece sum things up nicely when Schweizer says, "In real life, men can and do learn to love women whose lives don't revolve around catalyzing male transformation. In art, as well as life, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl ideal exists because too many men remain intimidated by women who do not revolve their lives around our needs and our growth. We need to let go of the glorious ladies of our mind and start being fully present with the very real women with minds of their own." The quote does a lot to contextualize Sam as a character. The truth is that she might be a more nuanced person than the film she's in allows her to be. But because we're following Andrew through the entirety of the film, with the POV being the cinematic equivalent of first-person perspective or third-person limited in literature, we're only given as much information about her as Andrew is willing to perceive for himself. Seeing as Garden State is hyper-focused on Andrew's arc, it almost makes sense that he can only see Sam as an abstract, two-dimensional character. And once that arc is complete, he does spend the final moments of the film expressing an interest in her and her feelings. Though not without an admittedly wince-inducing Hootie and the Blowfish adjacent I only want to be with you vibe.
I don't want to waste any more of my life without you in it, okay?
Yeah.
And I think I can do this. I mean, I want to. I mean, we have to, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I'm not trying to say this makes it okay that he only sees her as a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, because, again, it isn't. Just that it's vaguely compatible with the construction of the film. The Sam we got is the Sam we got because that's the one Braff wanted to bring to the big screen. It's the character he wished he knew at the time, and I see and understand why he did what he did there. Unfortunately, a lot of guys his age tend to fantasize about meeting that exact type of person and having them magically fix their lives. It's why the MPDG trope is a trope. Now, that being said, there is one other key reason why people dislike this movie. A reason that's also hard for me to disagree with, even after everything I've said about it today. It's because it's whiny and pretentious. Yeah, who would have thought that the extremely personal film about depression would feel like a 2-hour pity party, am I right? How cringe. In all seriousness, I do sometimes think that the so-called cringe factor of Garden State is a huge part of why so many viewers have turned on it over the past 2 decades. I have a couple of theories on why this could have happened, but the two that I'd like to focus on today are the ways in which culture has shifted since 2004 and how we've individually grown since then while the film hasn't. By writing about material that was so close to home, Braff tapped into a level of sentimentality that has since fallen out of vogue. Sentimentality is a complicated emotion. A common refrain among writers is that it's a bad thing to be sentimental, as much as with something like nostalgia, it can be difficult for your audience to relate to. The hyperspecificity of Braff's emotions can end up hurting his movie if the person watching it can't key into his wavelength. However, that's not to say that they don't get the material either. In my eyes, the problem is that the further we get from 2004, the harder it gets for everyone to get into that mindset. For example, when Andrew and Sam meet, Sam makes a point to ask him if he has a learning disability like his character in his most iconic role. Yet the way she does it is by casually using a slur that we've since moved away from as a society. So, watching this in 2025, you may be uncomfortable with hearing that and get pulled out of the scene.
Did you play quarterback? I mean, I thought you were really. Are you really? You're just as good as that quirky kid, and he's actually. I can't believe you're not really. I mean, if there's some sort of like Oscar, you would win, like hands down, kick his ass.
Likewise, the film makes a huge point of having Largeman stop using medication during his trip back to Jersey. And other than how it completely ignores that someone on as many medications as Andrew should never quit cold turkey, the film's treatment of medication is rooted in it being the social taboo it was back in that era. 2004 was only 1 year before Tom Cruise's infamous argument with Matt Lauer on The Today Show, another well-known instance of a blatantly shallow perspective on psychiatry from the time.
psychiatry is a pseudoscience.
Even Scrubs tackled mental health and how taboo seeking help was in multiple episodes, like in a 2007 one about Carla's postpartum depression, a condition where antidepressants paired with therapy are considered a frontline defense.
You can't get rid of this by sheer force of will or positive thinking or taking advice from a big Hollywood movie star and the dead science fiction writer he worships. You need to get some help.
The general idea that people can hypothetically manage their mental health conditions without medication isn't incorrect, nor is the implication that medication isn't always right for someone and that it doesn't come without its own problems in some cases. But the presentation of those beliefs lines up with how a lot of people viewed the topic back then. So it isn't that surprising that a lot of folks look back at Garden State and cringe. After all, the film is a look at a very specific point of time from the perspective of a very specific type of person, while being a complaint-laden look at that life on top of that. A life that many of us may have once been able to relate to, but have since outgrown. If you've seen Garden State before and once liked it, there's a good chance that you either saw it back when it first came out, or were like me and saw it when you were within like 5 or so years of Andrew's age.
That's what I aspired to do with this, was to say this is what not for everyone, you know, obviously not everyone could relate to what Woody Allen was writing about in Manhattan, but a lot of people could. And I guess what I was saying is not for everyone, but I want to write what it feels like for me to be a 20-something in this day and age.
I remember my first viewing of this movie vividly. It was February 2014, and I was 18 and a half. It was an especially cold winter in New Jersey, and I was going through some stuff as a freshman learning about film. When I saw this movie, I saw a lot of myself in it. I saw a character that was experiencing feelings that were comparable with my own. I heard music that was not precisely what I was into at the time. I was actually going through a real Yola Tango and slow dive phase, but that was sonically close enough to be familiar. Not to mention, I became a huge Shins fan after hearing Caring is Creepy and New Slang on the soundtrack. Everything about this movie was exactly what I needed to see and hear at the exact time I needed to see and hear it, to the point where my final short film as a college student inadvertently lifted a few beats from it, and a book I wrote for fun in 2023 did the same thing. I've revisited the movie 3 times in the years leading up to now, and each time was also a period in my life when I was feeling depressed, and felt comforted by its similitude toward what I was going through. The movie hadn't changed, and I hadn't changed that much in the several years since I first saw it. Yet something different happened when I revisited it to prepare for this video. I didn't care for it. I recognized a lot of the depth I discussed today for the first time, and I enjoyed chunks of the movie, sure, but the emotional arc didn't connect with me the way it had in the past. Because while the movie still hadn't changed, I finally had. Margaret Chamberlain ended up writing about something similar in a Medium post she made about her experience outgrowing movies. At one point in the article, she brings up 2017's Lady Bird, a film that she cites as being the one that made her fall in love with cinema. Yet despite that influence, the movie doesn't do much for her anymore. She said, "Upon rewatching Lady Bird last week, I found myself in tears within the first 15 minutes. But despite my emotional reaction, I had inevitably outgrown Lady Bird. I could no longer see my current self in it. I have not felt the same emotions as my 17-year-old self did while watching it." She's not the only one. Joel Haver made a video about the subject a year ago. Porno Kitsch posted a pretty solid list of movies that people have largely outgrown at one point too. That's life. One day you're playing jazz in your club when you look up and spot a copy of Easy A on Blu-ray staring back at you, and then you realize this is not your beautiful wife. And if that ain't enough for you, here's Roger Ebert saying the same thing about La Dolce Vita in 1997. Movies do not change, but their viewers do. When I saw La Dolce Vita in 1960, I was an adolescent for whom the sweet life represented everything I dreamed of. Sin, exotic European glamour, the weary romance of the cynical newspaperman. When I saw it again around 1970, I was living in a version of Marcello's world. Chicago's North Avenue was not the Via Veneto, but at 3 a.m., the denizens were just as colorful, and I was about Marcello's age. When I saw the film around 1980, Marcello was the same age, but I was 10 years older, had stopped drinking, and saw him not as a role model, but as a victim. By 1991, when I analyzed the film A Frame at a Time at the University of Colorado, Marcello seemed younger still, and while I had once admired and then criticized him, I now pitied and loved him. I think it's safe to suggest that the same thing could have happened to some of Garden State's former fans. At some point over the years, they just stopped being the person they were when they first saw it. They've grown past its message and/or gotten some cognitive distance from the material. The same goes for people who only saw Garden State well after the fact, or after they've already settled down, etc. It isn't for them. It might have been if they had seen it when they were younger, but they didn't. To use another, more iconic and well-regarded movie as an example, that's basically what happened to me with High Fidelity, just in regard to its subject matter as opposed to the main character's age. Had I seen this movie 10 to 15 years ago, there's a good chance that it would have gone down as one of my all-time favorite films. However, I didn't. Instead, I think it's a pretty good movie where John Cusack is just too mopey for my tastes, and where Jack Black has a personality that makes me want to punch him in the face anytime he talks.
But every other Echo and the Bunnymen album... Yeah, I have all the other ones. Oh, you do? Well, how about the Jesus and Mary chant? Yeah, they always seemed what? They always seemed really great is what they always seemed. They picked up where your precious Echo left off and you're sitting around complaining about no more Echo albums. I can't believe you don't own this record. That's insane. Jesus.
I know that the college-age version of me would have really related to Cusack's character and that he would have found Black funny because I hung out with people exactly like him, but I'm not that guy anymore. Tangentially, Frances Ha has long been my favorite Noah Baumbach movie. Yet every time I rewatch it, I do so knowing that I'm getting further away from being someone that can relate to it. There may come a day where I become a member of Team Greenberg, and eventually a member of Team While We're Young. It's already starting to happen to me with Before Sunrise, which is slowly ceding its spot as my favorite Linklater to the increasingly age-appropriate Before Sunset. And Before Sunrise took that spot from Dazed and Confused around the time I stopped being able to relate to teenagers that want to get wasted on the first day of summer.
The movie never changes. It can't change, but every time you see it, it seems different because you're different. You see different things.
With what had to have been dozens of comments or posts about the movie as my evidence, it's likely that Garden State is no different for some folks. Seeing as the construction of this film is so set in its perspective that it doesn't invite alternate views, it isn't that crazy for them to end up disliking or struggling to get into the movie. It is, after all, deliberately self-absorbed. The framing of the story through Andrew's eyes and the way that it was inspired by its writer, director, and star's life make it a more singular realization of one person's vision than many other films. Garden State places great weight on its own importance and feelings, using its metaphors and music as blunt instruments to convey its ideas. It's exactly what people say it is: pretentious. Here's the thing though, after taking the time to sit with the word and consider what it means, I don't think that's a problem. In fact, it actually brought me to the conclusion that being a little pretentious is good, actually. When people call something pretentious, they do it in order to evoke images similar to the ones in Willem Dafoe's art film at the end of Mr. Bean's Holiday, or Kirk's film from Gilmore Girls. Snooty, obtuse movies that are either boring or bewildering to its in-universe audience. However, the word can mean much more than that. Pretension may be defined as something that tries to come across as being better, more sophisticated, or more insightful than it truly is, but that can basically get applied to anything. Plenty of great films can be called pretentious. Just about anything by Terrence Malick fits the label due to how hyper-stylized and internalized its material is. You could say the same thing about Lynch, or some of Linklater's more introspective works. A lot of movie lovers may not say that about those films because we believe they're made by masters of the craft, but that's because we like them. We understand them and view them as successful efforts. All it would take for these films to get called pretentious is for someone to not like them. This is because pretension and art go hand in hand, and art is subjective.
I did not care for The Godfather.
What?
Did not care for The Godfather.
What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
The more personal or unconventional art becomes, the more subjective it gets. Coincidentally, because pretension is defined by self-importance, or trying to do more than its claimed creator is capable of doing, the more subjective art gets, the greater chance it has of being called that dreaded P word. A word that's an empty critique when you think about it because it's subjective.
Yeah, well, that's just like, your opinion, man.
And I don't think it's bad to be pretentious in the first place. Aside from how lazy it can be to use the word as a pejorative, I think there are things to appreciate about what we consider pretentiousness. Just as people like to joke that to be cringe is to be pretentious is to try and express something. That's all that really means, that someone tried to express an idea or feeling. Which is, and I'm a bit disappointed that I even need to say this, a good thing that we could use more of, even when the end result is somewhat middling. Take this video, for instance. I'm sure some of the folks watching this may have thought to themselves or commented that this video is a bit pretentious. And yeah, it is. A video defending a movie that has this sort of reputation, that put the time in to share personal anecdotes, cite interviews and multiple sources, make a thumbnail that might encourage someone to actually click on it, etc., does have a certain self-importance to itself. The video essay genre as a whole can be called pretentious because it implies that some random schmuck on the internet thought highly enough of their opinion to share it. But why exactly is that a bad thing? I feel like using the term pretentious to put a movie down is often unconstructive and, ironically enough, a bit pretentious. I know how immature it is for my thoughts on the word to basically boil down to no, you, but it's kinda true. If pretension is when something tries to come across as better or more important than it truly is, then it feels safe to point out that a movie's naysayers that rely on the term as the sole explanation for why they dislike something are probably being pretentious for themselves. My problem with the term is that it lacks specificity. To me, and not unlike how the MPDG trope often says more about a film's male protagonist than it does the woman being called one, using it as a put-down reflects a lack of desire to engage with the work on a meaningful level. It's a broad label that does little more than categorize something as being self-important, without taking the time to tell you how it's self-important, why the filmmaker may have decided to make something so self-important, or whether that self-importance was even well done. This is ultimately why I don't get the complaints that Garden State is pretentious, because what are we even getting mad at here? Someone trying to express something and coming up a bit short? Isn't that why people make art in the first place? To try and express a feeling or idea? Past the most common complaint that Sam isn't an interesting character, it's the thing that people keep saying about the movie while seldom taking the time to expound on why they feel that way. That's not to say that I don't agree with some of the complaints shared when they do specify what they don't like about the movie, but rather that a lot of them don't, or don't appear to be interested in reviewing the film for what it is as opposed to what it isn't. And given the fact that the film is more rooted in the artistic side of the medium than the commercial one, that type of criticism doesn't entirely sit right with me. Instead, the material gets approached like it was purely made to turn a profit when, as I stated in the opening minutes of this video, it clearly wasn't. I mean, here's a clip of Braff saying as much about this movie and Wish I Was Here from his off-camera episode.
It's very, very, very rare that someone makes a lot of money off a small personal art film. Sure. If I want to make money, the only place, unless you're Matt Damon or one of 20 movie stars, there's really the only place for actors to really make money these days left is on a hit network TV show. And I could very easily go do that. That's how I, as Zach Braff, could go, hey, I want to go make a lot more money. That's what I would do. Anyone in the business could tell you that. I'd team up with Bill Lawrence, our buddy again, and go make another network TV show. That is a clear way for me to get a payday.
If you don't like a movie like Garden State, that's fine. Just consider elaborating on why. Pick on stuff like how the screenplay doesn't quite handle setups and payoffs well, or how it's overly naive and has some very questionable dialogue.
You're in it right now, aren't you?
For example, I didn't care for liberal arts, and I happen to think that the 4:30 movie is one of the worst movies I've seen in a long time. However, my problem with both these movies isn't that they're pretentious. In the case of liberal arts, it's because Jesse and Zibby's relationship is straight up creepy, And in the case of the 430 movie, I had so many problems with it that I might just give it its own video someday. The point I'm trying to make here is that we need to consider the value in taking a step back when we don't like something and try to inspect the reason why. You know, so that we could potentially get something from the experience as opposed to nothing. And as far as allowing yourself to be pretentious goes, all that really means is giving yourself permission to care about something. One of my favorite David Bowie quotes about being an artist touches on a similar idea. You can look at his advice on never playing to the gallery as a call to be pretentious and go one step further than you think you're capable of.
Never play to the gallery. I think, but you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. And if the other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting.
And that's David frickin' Bowie. You could make an argument that most of his records were pretentious. One simply doesn't put out a song like Subterraneans and expect it to push records. Dan Fox corroborated that sentiment in his book Pretentiousness, Why It Matters when he said, "Pretension is about overreaching what you're capable of, taking the risk that you might fall flat on your face. Without people stretching themselves and, self-consciously or otherwise, risking failure, most of the major works of art, music, literature, cinema, dance, philosophy, science, clothing, design, architecture, engineering, horticulture, and cuisine that we cherish would simply not exist. New discoveries would not be made, or, like many great innovations, accidentally stumbled across. It is the engine oil of culture. Every creative motor needs it in order to keep running and not seize up and corrode with complacency." Both of these quotes speak to a growing priority in my life. With the prevalence of generative AI and a seemingly infinite number of tools designed to take over some of the process of artistic expression, it's become increasingly important for the things I engage with to feel human. Add to that social media and what feels like a flattening of culture according to Kyle Chayka's book Filter World, and I don't know, I've just come to the realization that I miss messiness. I miss movies that aren't optimized with the perfect runtime, or don't always convey their message with complete clarity. More than ever, I miss effort and watching people try to do better. In other words, I miss pretentiousness. Not just the so-called good version of the word, I mean pretentiousness in the way that other people use it. The one that's a glorified code word for smugness. The liberal arts and garden states of the world. Hell, even the 430 movies of the world when it's trying to be deep and the best it can muster up is some AMC Nicole Kidman ad-ass dialogue.
Movies make life make sense. Out here, man, world's full of lies. But in there, they tell the lie that tells the truth. And the truth about you and me is we're filmmakers. We just haven't made our films.
There's nothing more human than watching a movie where someone takes a chance on themselves and pours their heart out to an audience. It's cool when you can see that something was made for the sake of the doing and not out of a desire for financial self-preservation. Sure, many of these films may be messy or hard to follow, but I still appreciate and recognize when an effort's made. Similarly, while some of these efforts may not age well or may include ideas that we've since determined or accepted as problematic, I still think it's worth trying to separate the intentions from the execution in some of them. To try and remember what they're saying as opposed to only focusing on how they're saying it. It won't always work out for us, and there's definitely some art that won't transcend their issues, but that just means we'll have to take things on a case-by-case basis. It's not that a movie like Garden State is a perfect statement about the nature of depression. It's that there's value in creators like Braff getting to take a chance on something personal and having the balls to do just that. I find it refreshing whenever I watch movies like Garden State, its spiritual sequel Wish I Was Here, or even Braff's last film A Good Person, because they're affirmations of the fact that filmmakers sometimes get to tackle stuff that's a bit close to home. I appreciate how human they are. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a guy who gets a lot out of movies. They're my favorite art form by a country mile, and going to the movies, talking about movies, and researching/writing about movies are probably the closest thing in my life to practicing an organized religion. Cue a shot of an AMC with some Catholic organ. Yeah, okay, there it is. In addition to that, I love people. Like, as a concept. I love getting to know people and learning about their lives. I love that moment when someone shares something personal, like a favorite anecdote from their childhood, or a movie they can quote from start to finish, and I love when I get to connect the dots on how those things inform who they are. When I see movies like Garden State, I tend to let those two interests intersect. I obviously still view them as films that were written, shot, and edited, but I also take into account the person that made them. I try to read up on the inspiration for them, or see what I can learn about their creators in conjunction with what I'm seeing on the silver screen. To meet the writer and director in the middle, if you will. If I had to liken what I'm describing to something from a movie, it's basically that one Celine quote from Before Sunrise.
You know, I believe if there's any kind of God, it wouldn't be in any of us. Not you or me, but just this little space in between. If there's any kind of magic in this world, it must be in the attempt of understanding someone, sharing something.
It's because of this that I believe that more people could stand to watch so-called pretentious cinema. Because not only is pretentiousness all around us, but it's largely harmless. Most of these movies are gonna be mildly forgettable. At worst, you'll get something deeply divisive and maybe a bit gross, like the 2004 French film Anatomy of Hell. At best, you might see something that really resonates with you, or gets you to at least look at something in a more analytical way. I think it's important to engage with art of all levels, and that even when we're confronted with something self-absorbed, shallow, or just plain it's still an opportunity to grow. The effort of trying to understand the result of another person's blood, sweat, and tears might just be the reward for that. Especially since algorithms have emphasized media as an expression of the self in recent years, and how we could all use the odd reminder that art or media isn't always just about or for us. It's an exercise in empathy at a time where empathy is seemingly under attack. It won't always be fun or easy, but it encapsulates a sentiment I've found myself agreeing with lately. The idea that we need friction as human beings. The Conscientious Mind put it well in their article about friction when they said, "Humans learn through friction in the mind. Challenging your brain changes the neural connections it makes. Challenging your body hardens your muscles and increases the efficiency of your metabolic processes. Friction is what allows us to become better versions of ourselves." It's good to be challenged by the things around us, and as small as it sounds, watching movies like Garden State has the opportunity to do that. It's a low-stakes way of encouraging some introspection and reflecting on whether or not you can relate to the people depicted on screen. When it comes to watching movies, a lot of us need to be reminded that there's value to be had in watching something that's flawed, and we need to be reminded that art is made by people. Just ordinary, complicated, fallible people. Like Ted frickin' Mosby, or the guy from Scrubs and those T-Mobile commercials. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and that if you did, you consider leaving a like, answering the question of the day, or just sharing it with some friends you think might also enjoy it. On top of that, don't forget that you're more than welcome to check me out on Patreon or become a channel member to get those commentary tracks or early access to the highlight reels for those commentary tracks. You're also welcome to stalk me on Letterboxd if you want. So yeah, bye.
I think we corrupted this innocent girl enough for one afternoon.
I'm not innocent.
Yes, you are, right? And that's what I like about you. And I don't want this guy taking like some sketchy quarry in the middle of nowhere to find like crack whores huffing turpentine or like pit bulls each other or whatever it is you have us doing.
That's like the most worked up I've ever seen you.
He's protecting me.
So?
He likes me.
Like you.
He's my knight in shining armor.